The House by the Cemetery wasn't just another haunted house movie from the early 80s. It was a film that seemed almost hostile toward its own audience. People didn't leave the theater thrilled or relieved. They left confused, disturbed, and quietly angry, struggling to understand why the story refused to offer mercy logic or even emotional closure. Critics accused it of being cruel. Fans argued it was misunderstood. And decades later, the same question still hangs over the film like a curse that never lifted. Why would a director deliberately build a story with no escape? And why does this ending still feel unsettling long after the final scene fades to black? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The House by the Cemetery, 1981. 1. Lucio Fulci didn't approach The House by the Cemetery as a haunted house story in the traditional sense. By 1981, he was already infamous for treating horror less like entertainment and more like an endurance test. Where other directors used fear to thrill, Fulci used it to unsettle, often stripping away comfort until the audience felt exposed. This film arrived at a moment when haunted house movies were becoming familiar, even safe. Fulci seemed determined to sabotage that expectation from the first reel. Instead of establishing clear rules or a sympathetic emotional anchor, the film opens with confusion and displacement. The American setting feels slightly off, the characters behave with an odd emotional distance, and even the camera lingers too long on empty spaces. Fulci reportedly saw the house itself not as a backdrop, but as a mechanism, something designed to grind people down rather than scare them outright. That intention explains why the pacing feels deliberately uncomfortable, almost resistant to momentum. Many viewers at the time interpreted this as incompetence or indifference. But Fulci's defenders argue the opposite. The unease was engineered. The film denies rhythm on purpose, replacing it with a slow sense of entrapment. Scenes don't resolve cleanly, and tension is rarely released. Instead, it accumulates like pressure in a sealed room. What makes this approach controversial is how little Fulci cared about audience goodwill. He wasn't interested in catharsis. He wanted viewers to feel trapped inside the same hostile structure as the characters. In that sense, the movie doesn't fail to comfort. It refuses to try. And that refusal may be the most intentional choice Fulci ever made. 2. One of the most criticized elements of The House by the Cemetery was its central family, often described as emotionally distant or strangely passive. Horror audiences are trained to bond quickly with protagonists, especially parents trying to protect a child. Fulci subverted that instinct by presenting a family that feels disconnected almost from the moment they arrive. Instead of warmth, there is hesitation. Instead of urgency, there is delay. This wasn't simply a casting issue or a language barrier, as some critics suggested. Fulci's films frequently depict families as fragile systems already fractured before the horror begins. In this case, the family enters the house not as a united front, but as individuals sharing a space. Their inability to communicate clearly mirrors the house's refusal to explain itself. The child character, in particular, became a lightning rod for criticism. Many viewers found him irritating or unrealistically calm in the face of danger. Yet that calmness serves a purpose. Fulci often portrayed children not as innocent guides for the audience, but as silent witnesses, figures who sense the horror before adults can articulate it. The discomfort viewers feel toward him reflects their own lack of control. Rather than offering a family to root for, the film presents a group already emotionally isolated, making their fate feel less like tragedy and more like inevitability. Fulci removes the safety net of empathy and replaces it with observation. You don't watch the family survive the house. You watch the house slowly erase them. That distance frustrates traditional expectations, but it reinforces the film's core idea. This is not a story about love overcoming evil. It's about what happens when nothing is strong enough to stop it. 3. The house itself is often described as evil. But The House by the Cemetery never defines that evil in clear terms. Unlike many haunted house films, there is no comforting mythology to lean on. The building doesn't announce its rules, its boundaries, or its limits. It simply exists, absorbing those who step inside. That ambiguity became one of the film's most divisive features. Fulci avoided giving the audience a clear explanation, because explanation creates distance. Once a threat is understood, it can be managed. In this film, understanding is withheld. The house feels ancient, not because of its history, but because it operates outside moral logic. It doesn't punish wrongdoing. It doesn't reward virtue. It consumes indiscriminately. This approach aligns with Fulci's broader worldview, where horror is less about monsters and more about systems that cannot be reasoned with. The house behaves like a closed ecosystem indifferent to human emotion. Characters don't trigger danger through mistakes. Danger simply unfolds. That randomness unsettles viewers who expect narrative fairness. By refusing to personify the house or reduce it to a ghost story, Fulci transforms it into something colder. It becomes a space where cause and effect dissolve. Survival isn't earned. Death isn't meaningful. Everything feels preordained the moment the door closes behind them. For some viewers, this ambiguity feels lazy. For others, it's what makes the film linger. The house doesn't chase you. It waits. And once it has you, it doesn't need to explain why. 4. When The House by the Cemetery was released, much of the backlash focused on its pacing. Audiences complained that the film moved too slowly, lingering on silence corridors and empty rooms instead of delivering frequent shocks. But that slowness wasn't a flaw. Fulci failed to correct. It was a weapon he used deliberately. He believed fear worked best when the viewer was forced to wait trapped in anticipation with no clear reward. Fulci structured the film to resist the rhythm audiences expected from horror at the time. Scenes often end without payoff. Conversations trail off. The camera stays in places longer than comfort allows. This creates a sensation of time stretching, as if the house itself is dilating moments to wear the characters down. Instead of spikes of terror, the film offers a constant low-level pressure. This approach frustrated viewers who wanted release. Horror usually offers a patterned tension scare relief. Fulci removes the relief. The tension never fully resets, which makes the experience feel exhausting rather than exciting. Critics labeled this boring. Fulci saw it as honest. Real dread, in his view, doesn't come and go, it lingers. The result is a film that feels longer than its runtime. Not because nothing happens, but because nothing resolves. You're denied the satisfaction of progression. The house doesn't escalate, it encloses. By the time violence arrives, it feels less like a climax and more like an inevitability that's been patiently waiting. That choice alienated casual viewers, but it cemented the film's cult reputation. The pacing isn't meant to entertain. It's meant to erode patience until discomfort replaces curiosity entirely. 5. The film's American setting is another detail that quietly unsettles viewers, especially when paired with its unmistakably Italian sensibility. Fulci often set his films in foreign locations, but here, the geography feels deliberately vague. Streets don't connect logically. Interiors feel detached from the outside world. Even daylight scenes carry a faint sense of artificiality. This dislocation wasn't accidental. Fulci was less interested in realism than in emotional plausibility. By filming America through a European lens, he creates a version of the setting that feels familiar but slightly wrong. Accents clash. Cultural cues don't align. The result is a place that looks like home but doesn't behave like one. That subtle wrongness reinforces the film's central theme of displacement. The family isn't just new to the house, they're new to the world it exists in. Nothing quite fits, and that friction builds unease without needing overt horror. Even mundane activities feel strained, as if the environment itself resists normal life. Some critics dismissed this as poor production planning or awkward dubbing. Others later recognized it as part of Fulci's strategy. By denying a stable sense of place, he prevents viewers from grounding themselves. You're never sure where you are, which makes escape feel impossible even in theory. The house may be the center of the nightmare, but the world around it offers no refuge. Everything feels provisional, temporary, as though reality itself is quietly slipping out of alignment. 6. Few elements of The House by the Cemetery sparked as much debate as its refusal to clearly define a protagonist. While the family appears central, no single character is positioned as the emotional guide for the audience. Traditional horror relies on identification, someone to fear with someone to hope for. Fulci denies that anchor. Each character is observed rather than embraced. Their reactions are muted, their decisions hesitant. Even moments that should inspire urgency are underplayed. This emotional flatness unnerves viewers because it removes the usual cues telling them how to feel. You're left interpreting events without guidance. Fulci believed that strong identification softened horror. If viewers latch onto a hero, they subconsciously expect survival. By dispersing focus and withholding intimacy, he keeps every outcome possible, including the worst ones. No one is protected by narrative importance. This approach makes the violence feel colder. When harm occurs, it isn't framed as a tragic turning point or a rallying cry. It simply happens absorbed by the house like everything else. There's no moral emphasis, no sense of escalation, just continuation. For many viewers, this feels cruel. For others, it's precisely why the film stands apart. The House by the Cemetery doesn't invite you to fight alongside its characters. It asks you to watch powerless as identification dissolves. And once that safety net is gone, the film has nothing left to take from you but patience. 7. One of the most unsettling aspects of The House by the Cemetery is how violence is framed not as spectacle, but as intrusion. Fulci was known for graphic imagery, yet here the brutality feels oddly restrained in its presentation. When it arrives, it doesn't explode onto the screen. It seeps in abrupt and unceremonious, as if the film itself is reluctant to acknowledge it. That restraint makes the moments of violence feel more invasive than shocking. Instead of using gore to thrill, Fulci uses it to break the rhythm of numb anticipation. Long stretches of quiet observation lull the viewer into a false sense of endurance. Then violence interrupts without warning, offering no buildup and no aftermath designed for reflection. The camera doesn't linger for admiration. It moves on indifferent. This technique denies viewers the emotional release they subconsciously expect from horror. Violence usually functions as punctuation, a moment that confirms the danger and resets tension. In this film, it does neither. It feels like a symptom, not a climax. The house doesn't escalate its behavior. It simply reveals what it has always been capable of. Critics accused Fulci of nihilism, arguing that these moments existed only to provoke. But in context, they reinforce the film's bleak logic. There is no moral accounting. Violence doesn't teach lessons or alter trajectories. It confirms that the house operates beyond human values. By refusing to frame brutality as meaningful, Fulci strips it of narrative comfort. What remains is a cold acknowledgement harm can arrive suddenly, senselessly, and without consequence. The horror isn't what happens on screen, it's the realization that nothing changes afterward. 8. Sound design plays a crucial role in shaping the film's suffocating atmosphere. Yet it's often overshadowed by discussion of visuals and plot. The House by the Cemetery uses silence as aggressively as it uses music. Long stretches pass with minimal sound, forcing viewers to sit inside the environment rather than observe it from a safe distance. When music does appear, it rarely signals relief or triumph. The score drifts in and out, detached from emotional cues. It doesn't guide reactions, it destabilizes them. Instead of swelling during moments of danger, it often fades, leaving scenes exposed and uncomfortable. This deliberate misuse of audio expectations unsettles viewers on a subconscious level. Horror audiences are trained to anticipate scares through sound. Fulci removes that warning system. Silence becomes threatening, and music offers no reassurance. The result is a constant sense of misalignment between what you hear and what you expect to feel. Some viewers interpret this as sloppy mixing or poor scoring. But Fulci understood that sound is psychological architecture. By denying consistent audio patterns, he makes the house feel acoustically hostile, as if it refuses to communicate on human terms. The environment doesn't echo screams in a satisfying way. It absorbs them. Even moments of dialogue feel swallowed by the space. That auditory emptiness reinforces the film's emotional isolation. You're not being led through a haunted house attraction. You're trapped inside a space that doesn't acknowledge your presence. In that silence, imagination fills the gaps. And what the film withholds becomes more unsettling than anything it explicitly provides. 9. The film's reputation suffered for years because many viewers expected explanation and never received it. The House by the Cemetery withholds clarity even as events escalate, refusing to translate its imagery into answers. That choice frustrated audiences who wanted closure, coherence, or at least a rulebook. Fulci viewed explanation as dilution. Once horror is named and categorized, it loses its power. Instead of resolving mysteries, the film piles them on letting contradictions coexist. The house feels ancient, but undefined. The threat feels specific, yet unknowable. Nothing aligns neatly. This ambiguity forces viewers into an uncomfortable role. You're not solving a puzzle, you're enduring an experience. The film doesn't reward attention with insight. Careful observation doesn't unlock secrets. That rejection of narrative fairness feels antagonistic, especially to viewers trained to believe that patience will be compensated. Over time, this refusal became the film's defining trait. What once felt like a failure now reads as intention. Fulci wasn't interested in satisfying curiosity. He was interested in testing it. How long would viewers tolerate confusion before disengaging? For some, the answer was immediate rejection. For others, the unresolved nature of the film kept it alive in memory. The lack of explanation invites reinterpretation, discussion, and obsession. In denying answers, the film ensures it's never finished, only revisited. And perhaps that's the cruelest trick of all. The house doesn't explain itself because it doesn't need to. The questions it leaves behind do the work for it. 10. Few aspects of The House by the Cemetery provoked as much anger as its ending, which many viewers felt crossed an unspoken line. Horror films often punish characters, but they usually preserve a sense of balance, some form of meaning or moral logic. Fulci dismantles that expectation entirely. The film's conclusion doesn't feel tragic or shocking in a conventional way. It feels final, abrupt, and emotionally unforgiving. What unsettled audiences most was not simply what happens, but how little the film seems to care about the impact. There is no lingering reflection, no attempt to soften the blow. The story ends as if the house itself has decided the conversation is over. For viewers accustomed to narrative closure, this felt less like horror and more like betrayal. Fulci defended this choice by arguing that comfort undermines fear. A merciful ending reassures the audience that the world still makes sense. By refusing that reassurance, he forces viewers to confront the idea that horror doesn't always resolve, it simply stops. The film doesn't explain the ending, because explanation would reintroduce control. Critics accused Fulci of cruelty for cruelty's sake. Supporters countered that the ending was honest, in a way most horror films avoid. Life doesn't guarantee fairness, and neither does this story. The outrage surrounding the finale became inseparable from the film's identity, ensuring it would be discussed long after its release. Ironically, the ending's harshness is what preserved the film. A softer conclusion might have been forgotten. This one left scars, and scars tend to last. 11. Children occupy a uniquely unsettling space in Fulci's cinema and The House by the Cemetery. is no exception. Unlike many horror films that frame children as symbols of innocence or hope, Fulci treats them as vessels of vulnerability without protection. The child in this film doesn't save the adults or guide the audience. He endures alongside them, often sensing danger without understanding it. This portrayal disturbed viewers who expected emotional cues from the child's reactions. Instead of panic or reassurance, there is quiet awareness. His responses feel delayed, restrained, almost resigned. That restraint unsettles because it denies viewers an emotional mirror. You don't feel fear through him, you observe fear accumulating around him. Fulci often suggested that children in horror represent truth without interpretation. They perceive threat directly, without the rational filters adults rely on. In this film, that perception offers no advantage. Awareness doesn't grant safety. It merely confirms what cannot be changed. The discomfort viewers feel toward the child character reflects a deeper anxiety. If even innocence is powerless, then nothing is sacred. The film strips away the comforting idea that youth guarantees survival or moral protection. Rather than exploiting childhood fear for shock value, Fulci uses it to dismantle sentimentality. The presence of a child doesn't soften the story, it sharpens it. By the time the film ends, innocence hasn't been corrupted. It's simply been rendered irrelevant. 12. Over time, The House by the Cemetery underwent a quiet transformation from critical failure to cult artifact. Early reactions dismissed it as incoherent or mean-spirited, but repeat viewings revealed a consistency beneath the chaos. What once seemed careless began to feel deliberate. Patterns emerged. Intent surfaced. Cult audiences embraced the film precisely because it refused to compromise. Its flaws became features. The awkward pacing, emotional distance, and narrative hostility distinguished it from more accessible horror. Viewers drawn to the film weren't looking for comfort, they were looking for something that lingered. This reevaluation didn't happen overnight. It unfolded through late-night broadcasts, home video releases, and word of mouth among horror enthusiasts. Removed from theatrical expectations, the film could be approached on its own terms. In that context, its cruelty felt purposeful rather than careless. Fulci's reputation evolved alongside it. What critics once labeled incompetence was reframed as defiance. The film wasn't trying to please everyone, it was daring viewers to stay. Today, The House by the Cemetery is often cited as one of Fulci's most uncompromising works. Not because it's his most graphic or polished, but because it never backs down. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't apologize. And in a genre built on release and resolution, that stubborn refusal may be its most enduring legacy. 13. The hostility many viewers feel toward The House by the Cemetery often comes from a deeper discomfort. The film refuses to acknowledge the audience as participants. Most horror movies constantly negotiate with viewers, offering signals, clues, and emotional handholds. Fulci removes that dialogue entirely. The film behaves as if no one is watching, and that indifference is unsettling. Scenes unfold without emphasis, as though meaning is irrelevant. The camera doesn't guide interpretation or underline importance. You're left unsure which moments matter and which are simply passing time. That uncertainty erodes confidence. Viewers accustomed to being led feel abandoned. Fulci believed that cinema had become too accommodating. By the early 80s, horror films were increasingly self-aware, anticipating reactions and adjusting accordingly. The House by the Cemetery rejects that trend. It doesn't ask what the audience wants. It proceeds according to its own internal logic, even when that logic feels opaque. This approach creates an adversarial relationship. Watching the film feels less like consumption and more like confrontation. The movie doesn't want approval. It doesn't seek understanding. It exists, and viewers must decide whether to endure it. For some, that indifference reads as arrogance. For others, it feels strangely honest. The film doesn't pretend to care about comfort because horror, in Fulci's view, isn't meant to be polite. In refusing to acknowledge the audience, The House by the Cemetery places viewers in the same position as its characters present, aware and powerless to influence the outcome. 14. Time behaves strangely inside the film, and not just in terms of pacing. Events feel disconnected from a clear timeline, as if the house exists outside ordinary chronology. Days pass without markers. Night and day blur. The sense of progression dissolves, replaced by repetition and stasis. This temporal disorientation reinforces the feeling of entrapment. If time doesn't move forward in a meaningful way, escape becomes abstract. The characters aren't just trapped in space, they're trapped in duration. Nothing changes enough to signal hope. Fulci avoided clear temporal cues intentionally. Horror that obeys time can be measured and anticipated. Horror that ignores it feels eternal. The house doesn't rush, it doesn't age, it waits. That waiting creates dread more effectively than urgency ever could. Viewers often struggle to recall the exact sequence of events after watching the film. Scenes bleed together, stripped of cause and effect clarity. That confusion lingers, making the experience feel dreamlike in retrospect. Rather than building toward a climax, the film circles itself. Each moment feels like confirmation that nothing is progressing toward resolution. This static quality unsettles because it contradicts narrative instinct. Stories are supposed to move. This one sinks. In that sense, the house isn't merely haunted, it's suspended. And once you enter time, stops asking permission. 15. What ultimately defines The House by the Cemetery is not fear, violence, or even mystery. It's inevitability. From the moment the family crosses the threshold, the film communicates that outcomes are fixed, choices feel cosmetic, decisions change nothing. This sense of inevitability strips tension of its usual function. You're not watching to see if the characters escape. You're watching to see how long it takes before the house finishes with them. That shift reframes every scene. Hope becomes irrelevant. Fulci believed that inevitability was more frightening than surprise. Surprises pass, certainty lingers. By removing the illusion of agency, he creates a suffocating atmosphere where dread doesn't spike, it settles. Many viewers resist this approach because it denies the fantasy of control. Horror often allows audiences to imagine what they would do differently. This film doesn't offer that comfort. There is no right decision, only delay. That's why the film feels cruel. It doesn't punish mistakes. It erases the concept of escape entirely. Once inside, the characters aren't fighting the house, they're waiting for it to conclude its process. In the end, The House by the Cemetery isn't about terror erupting. It's about terror being unavoidable. And that quiet certainty may be its most disturbing truth. 16. By the time The House by the Cemetery reaches its final act, Fulci has already stripped away most conventional sources of tension. There is no mystery left to solve, no strategy to attempt, no illusion that cleverness will matter. What remains is exposure. The film narrows its focus, not to build excitement, but to remove distance between the viewer and the outcome. This narrowing is deliberate. Fulci reduces narrative movement until the story feels almost static. Characters stop making meaningful decisions. Dialogue becomes functional, even mechanical. The house no longer hides its hostility, it simply enacts it. This creates a suffocating calm that feels worse than chaos. Many horror films use escalation to heighten fear. Fulci does the opposite. He drains energy from the story so that the final moments arrive without fanfare. There is no crescendo, only completion. The absence of spectacle denies viewers emotional preparation. That lack of preparation is what makes the ending feel brutal. It doesn't arrive as a climax you can brace for. It arrives like a door quietly closing. You realize too late that the film has already decided how this will end. Some viewers describe this as anticlimactic. Others recognize it as Fulci's most consistent choice. The film never promised rescue, it promised endurance. And when endurance runs out, nothing dramatic happens. The story simply stops. In that silence, the horror doesn't explode. It settles, leaving viewers to sit with the realization that there was never another path. 17. One reason The House by the Cemetery continues to provoke debate is how easily it resists definitive interpretation. Attempts to solve the film often collapse under scrutiny. The mythology refuses to lock into place. Symbolic readings contradict each other. No single explanation fully accounts for what happens. This resistance frustrates viewers trained to extract meaning from horror. Many films reward analysis with clarity. Fulci punishes it with ambiguity. The more you search for answers, the more fragmented the experience becomes. That fragmentation may be the point. Fulci wasn't constructing a puzzle, he was constructing a mood. The house doesn't function according to symbolic logic. It doesn't represent a single idea. It behaves more like a force operating without intention the audience can grasp. Over time, this refusal to cohere has kept the film alive in discussion. Every generation brings new interpretations, none of them final. The film survives not because it explains itself, but because it doesn't. In that sense, The House by the Cemetery becomes participatory without being accommodating. Viewers supply meaning not because the film invites them to, but because they're desperate to impose order on something that refuses it. That tension between interpretation and resistance is what turns rejection into obsession. The film doesn't end when the credits roll. It continues in argument, disagreement, and unease, a story that never quite finishes telling itself. 18. Fulci's legacy is often measured by excess gore-shocked transgression. But The House by the Cemetery reveals a quieter cruelty beneath that reputation. This film isn't aggressive in the obvious sense. It's patient. Its power comes from restraint rather than overload. Unlike his more infamous works, this film doesn't assault the senses continuously. It waits. It withholds. It allows discomfort to accumulate naturally. That restraint makes the cruelty feel more personal. You're not overwhelmed. You're cornered. This subtlety is easy to miss, especially for viewers expecting Fulci's trademark extremity. But the film's endurance suggests that cruelty doesn't need volume. It needs consistency. Every choice reinforces the same message: nothing here exists for your comfort. That consistency is why the film divides audiences so sharply. Those seeking sensation feel cheated. Those sensitive to atmosphere feel trapped. Both reactions are valid, and both are intentional. Fulci didn't design the film to be loved. He designed it to persist. And decades later, it still does precisely because it never compromises its hostility. In a genre obsessed with spectacle, The House by the Cemetery remains disturbing for a simpler reason. It doesn't care how you feel about it. It never did. 19. The reason The House by the Cemetery continues to feel so divisive is that it violates an unspoken contract between horror films and their audience. Most horror promises that suffering will eventually be transformed into meaning survival revelation, or at least narrative justice. Fulci breaks that contract completely. The film offers suffering without conversion. Viewers often describe feeling cheated, but that reaction reveals how deeply conditioned audiences are to expect compensation for endurance. Fulci removes that expectation. Watching the film becomes an act of persistence, with no guarantee of reward. The longer you stay, the more complicit you feel in your own discomfort. This is why the film's reputation improved over time rather than immediately. Distance softened the initial outrage and allowed viewers to reconsider intent. What once felt like incompetence began to look like defiance. Fulci wasn't failing to deliver satisfaction, he was rejecting the concept. That rejection reframes the film as an experiment. How much frustration can an audience tolerate before disengaging? How much ambiguity before anger replaces curiosity? The answers differ wildly, which explains why reactions to the film remain so polarized. In denying transformation. The House by the Cemetery exposes a raw truth about horror consumption. We don't just seek fear, we seek reassurance that fear has meaning. This film offers none and forces viewers to confront why that absence feels unbearable. 20. When viewed in isolation, The House by the Cemetery can feel bleak, even cruel. But placed within Fulci's broader body of work, it reveals something more deliberate. This film represents his most uncompromising statement about horror as experience rather than story. Everything that might soften the blow, clarity, empathy, resolution, is stripped away. What remains is endurance. The film doesn't escalate toward triumph or collapse into chaos. It persists until it decides to stop. That persistence mirrors the house itself, static, indifferent, and uninterested in human expectations. This is why the film refuses to fade from memory. It doesn't provide a takeaway that can be neatly summarized. Instead, it leaves a residue, a lingering sense of violation that resists closure. Viewers don't remember specific scares as much as they remember how the film made them feel afterward. Fulci once suggested that true horror isn't about fear in the moment, but discomfort that lingers when the moment is gone. The House by the Cemetery embodies that philosophy more purely than almost any of his other films. In the end, the film doesn't ask to be understood. It asks only one thing. How long are you willing to stay inside something that gives you nothing back? What lingers longest after The House by the Cemetery isn't a scene, a scare, or even a character. It's the feeling that the film never actually ended. When the final moments arrive, there is no emotional resolution, no sense of aftermath. The story doesn't feel complete. It feels abandoned. And that unresolved state may be the film's most unsettling achievement. Fulci understood that closure reassures the audience that the nightmare is contained. Once a story ends cleanly, fear can be categorized and dismissed. This film refuses that mercy. The absence of closure leaves viewers suspended, forced to carry the discomfort beyond the screen. The house doesn't release you. It simply stops acknowledging you. Many fans argue that this is why the film grows more disturbing with time. Memory fills in the gaps the film leaves behind. Viewers replay moments, search for meaning, and debate intent, not because answers are hidden, but because none were ever provided. The story survives by refusing to settle. In that sense, The House by the Cemetery functions less like a narrative and more like a psychological imprint. It embeds itself quietly, resurfacing later as unease rather than fear. The cruelty isn't confined to the plot. It's transferred to the viewer. Perhaps the film's true secret is this: the house was never the villain. The real trap is the expectation that horror should make sense, offer fairness, or provide relief. Fulci dismantles that expectation completely and leaves you alone with the consequences. If The House by the Cemetery left you unsettled rather than satisfied, that reaction may be exactly what it was designed to provoke. This isn't a film that asks for admiration or affection. It asks for endurance. If you found yourself frustrated, disturbed, or still thinking about it long after it ended, you're not alone. Let us know in the comments. Which fact surprised you the most, and whether you believe Fulci's ending was cruel or brutally honest. Was the house truly evil, or was it simply indifferent? And if there's another film you think hides its secrets just as well, tell us which one we should dig into next.